Take my lips and speak through them. Take our ears and hear through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire with love for thee. May I speak in the name of the living God.
Amen.
We have a story of a healing within a healing this morning, a play within a play. One healing is at the public request of a powerful man, the other by the secret touch of an untouchable woman. Jairus was the ruler of the synagogue, a man of substance, rich, powerful, religiously prominent. He has a name. He has it all. But he's willing to throw it all away because his little daughter is dying. Nothing clarifies like a crisis. Jairus comes to Jesus in desperation. He had heard him in the synagogue. He was the administrator. Synagogues were teaching institutions, and any adult male could teach. Jesus didn't need any special credentials, and he didn't have any. But he taught with authority and not as their scribes, embarrassing, but true. He was also known to be a healer and an exorcist. He had disciples and a following. If Jairus had been ill, he wouldn't have come. But it wasn't Jairus. It was his 12-year-old daughter. His power, wealth, and pride were useless. He needed a miracle. He needed Jesus. He threw himself at Jesus' feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." Jesus' response is summed up in 5 words, and he went with him. The world of religion, the world of men, has had little time for women and children. But Jesus, surrounded by a crowd as he lands on the beach, after having stilled a storm and cast out a legion of demons, drops everything to help a desperate father humbled by grief and his desperate dying daughter. Jesus has time for children, for women, for the sick, the frightened, and the demon-possessed, for the sinful, the lost, the lonely, and the left behind. In short, Jesus has time for us. And he went with him. As Jesus was going to Jairus' house, a desperate woman who had been hemorrhaging for 12 years decides to take desperate action. She'd heard of what Jesus had done for others, and she hoped and prayed he would do it for her. "If I can but touch his clothes, I will be made well." It was a scandalous thing to do. The flow of blood made her ritually unclean. She couldn't set foot in the synagogue. Whatever and whoever she touched became unclean. To touch Jesus' clothes would have made him unclean. Yet she decides to risk it. She reaches out and touches his clothes. Immediately, her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she had been healed. Immediately, Jesus was aware that power had gone forth from him, and he stopped and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" The disciples are incredulous. "You see the crowd pressing in on us? How can you ask, 'Who touched me?'" This woman, a social outcast named Unknown, rises up. Terrified, she falls at Jesus' feet. Will he criticize her? Will the healing be withdrawn? Trembling with fear, she tells him the whole truth about the bleeding and the doctors and the money and the touch. Jesus turns his whole attention to her and her years of isolation. "Daughter," he says, Daughter, the name of relationship and belonging. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. The invisible woman is seen by Jesus and the crowd. She is in every way healed, restored, saved. To Jairus, the delay must have been anguishing. And while Jesus was speaking, his worst fears were realized. People came from his house with the news, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? Overhearing them, Jesus says to Jairus, do not fear, only believe. Can you imagine how hard that must have been to do? In the face of the facts. I mean, this is pretty bleak stuff. Stay with me, says Jesus. Stay with me, trust me. I'm here, I'm with you. Transformation is yet possible in all times and in all places. National divisions can cease. Racial divisions can heal. The planet can be saved. Hearts can change. Do not fear. Only believe. Jesus and Jairus arrive at the house. They're enveloped in the flutes and the wailings that are the rituals of grief. Why do you make a commotion and weep? Jesus asks. The child is not dead, but sleeping. The mourners laugh at this absurdity. Be serious. We know death when we see it. We know what to do with death. We're prepared for that. Well, they were prepared for that. What we're not prepared for is what they were not prepared for, which is life. They were not prepared, as we are not prepared for a God for whom death is no more final than sleep. Jesus puts them all out of the room, alone with only the girl and her parents and Peter, James, and John. Jesus touches the child, taking her by the hand. He says to her, Talitha kum. Talitha kum. One of the rare times we hear Jesus' actual words in the language of Aramaic that he actually spoke. Remembered by Peter, told to Mark, preserved for us. Talitha kum. Little girl, I say to you, arise. Little girl, get up. And immediately the girl got up and began to walk about. She was 12 years old. And all were completely astonished. And he said, keep quiet about this. And he told them to give her something to eat. Jesus gives generously, not begrudgingly, to those who seek him, those who surrender all to trust him. This woman, this child and her father, you and me. He gives each what they need. He heals the woman with the flow of blood. He raises the young girl from the dead. And all are amazed. But in both cases, he does more. He heals relationships. He restores connection. To the publicly shunned woman, he says it in a crowd. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. In the family home, he says, keep quiet about what happened here. Don't get so carried away you forget the child. Take care of her. Take care of each other. Give her something to eat. so gentle, so simple, so just exactly like him. When he was about to die for us, he made feeding us the way that we would stay connected to him. Take and eat. Drink this. Do this in remembrance of me. I am here. I am with you. Transformation is yet possible. Jesus responds to the desperate prayers of desperate people today, not presumably because unless we're desperate, he won't listen, but because for many of us, unless we're desperate, until we're desperate, we won't turn to him. We won't. It happens to me too. It's so perverse. Who can explain it? We won't fall on our knees and admit that what we really need, only Jesus can give. That's what the Father knows in the gospel this morning. That's what the bleeding woman knows. They know that only Jesus can help them. They step out in faith and God meets them with power. It's David and Goliath all over again. We see it again and again and again. This is what the life of faith looks like. We step out in faith and God meets us with power. We step out in faith and God meets us with power. We have a play within a play this morning. A healing within a healing. But so much more than physical healing is happening here. The word rendered to be healed in this passage is also translated, and more often translated, to save, to preserve, to rescue, to deliver, to protect. Jesus doesn't compartmentalize. The kingdom he brings, the reign of God breaking in through his ministry, seeks to restore our bodies and our souls, our hearts, our minds, our spirits, our relationships, and our communities. There is much to feel desperate about. There is much to grieve. Fear will come against us. But Jesus is with us. Jesus is for us. By the grace of God, in the strength of his company, his love, his peace, his power, even facing death itself, we rise. Do not fear. Only believe. Amen.